And let's see if we can finish this, the second chapter of The Cockatrice Boys by Joan Aiken. "Come in, Scounty, come in," said the colonel 10 minutes later. "Help yourself to a glass of ginger wine. It was you, was it not, received the radio message 2 days ago from Manchester?" "Yes, Colonel." "How did they contrive to send the message? I thought Manchester was deprived of all basic services." "The mayor said, if I understood him correctly, that the vibrations set up by the wings of huge flocks of snarks overhead created such exceptional static in the atmosphere that large portions of the city were infiltrated by electric current. Even toothbrushes, carving knives, and hedge clippers became capable of transmitting electric messages." I see. Like this kettle of mine. It just caught a chat between 2 radio cabs." "Indeed, sir. That kettle will be a decided asset if it continues to pick up external transmissions. Perhaps by means of it we shall be able to discover something about the causes and origins of the problems that we face," said Major Scanty hopefully. The outskirts of Manchester were more devastated than those of London in a different way. There were great greasy frozen swamps with derelict factories, twisted metal girders, ruined concrete overpasses, and piles of snowy black coal dust grown over with bindweed. But the town had not been flattened. Far away in the distance, high-rise buildings could still be seen. The problem here had been Snarks, not the shovel-tuskers, who had knocked London flat. Before it reached the city, the rail tracks sank down out of sight into a greenish peaty bog puddled all over with ice and rainbow patches of oil. A party of 10 sappers was sent out to make good the track, layering it underneath with rapid-setting filler and plastic ties. The men wore well-greased snark glasses and carried Kelpie knives for close combat. They were protected by another party in the driver's cab, armed with flamethrowers and also December guns, which fired explosive missiles of ice, cooled to minus 60 degrees Celsius. But despite this, the work party suffered badly. Aiken, dashing about the cab, feverishly cleaning the big glass windows, wiping off snark scales, telepod fur, powder burns, and men's sweat, keeping the vision clear for the marksman, was horrified to see how, man by man, the brave sappers were picked off. 6 of them just vanished when snarks came too close. 1 was dragged away by a telepod, 1 chopped in 2 by a manticore, and 2 were pulled into the swamp by cockadrills. Just the same, in 4 days the task was finished. The track had been made usable, and the cockatrice bell clanked slowly and cautiously over the doubtful stretch. And then, very much faster up the slope beyond, Lance Corporal Pitkin switching in half a dozen of his wind generators. But the colonel was cursing long and bitterly as he paced about his cabin, with Major Scanty and Captain Twilights taking turns to look through the periscope that allowed a further view of the track ahead. "Some of my very best men. Those butterheads at Supply just don't know the first thing about snarks." "How many real snark masks have we given, sir?" asked Captain Twilight. Only half enough for the truth." "How many real snark masks were we given, sir?" asked Captain Twilight. "Only enough for half the troop, and it's plain we're going to have a pitched battle on our hands before we can get into Manchester. The men will have to wear masks for that. Ensign Catchpole," he barked over the intercom. "Sir, cut your engine. We'll stop here for the night and recharge. Sergeant Bellswinger?" "Yes, sir." "We'll have a sally at first light tomorrow." 80 men with full battle equipment, masks, griffin capes, and the lot. "Meanwhile, tell the lads to take it easy and turn in early. And tell Mrs. Shirt to give them something extra tasty for their evening meal. And Bellswinger, send drummer boy Prestwich along here, will you?" "Yes, sir." Aiken was feeling depressed. He had seen 10 people he knew, men who had been kind to him, cracked jokes, given him butter tokens, shown him a fast way to load his pistol, told him tales of cockatrices and how to deal with bonacons. He had seen those men vanish like drops of water on a hot plate, and it had upset him badly. His expression was very dejected as he knocked and entered the colonel's cabin. "Now, Prestwich," said the colonel, taking no notice of this, "there's a kind of monster in these parts that's hypersensitive to loud rhythmic noises. Sir, the monsters can't stand a regular row. All the ones in the Aparcus family are like that." I don't know. I don't know no apocrypuses, sir. We don't have many round London, but here there are whole schools of them. Hydra, Cockadrill, Glyptodont, Telepod, Kelpies, Griffins. They all belong to the Apocalypse family. Quite a big family, sir. If they hear a loud, sustained, regular noise, they tend to fall in half. Cool, sir. So you'll be out there tomorrow with those 80 men, Prestwich, and I want you playing your drum really loud so long as the battle lasts. Do you understand? I don't want you to stop for a single moment. Can you do that? Cool, sir. Yes, sir, said Dyken joyfully. Ask Mrs. Churt to give you a mug of hot milk with malt and molasses and rum flavouring in it. Last thing tonight and first thing tomorrow. Tell her I said so. Yes, sir. Good night, sir. Good night, Dyken. That ain't a bad boy, said Captain Twilight as the brass-handled door closed behind Dyken. He's got some sand in him. When Dyken went along to Mrs. Churt for his bedtime drink, he found her with a melancholy, distant look in her eye. She, too, had been grieved by the loss of the 10 men, but she was working even harder than usual at her cross-stitch canvas. It had a picture of a stylized cockatrice on it, transfixed by a crossbow quarrel. A lot of the men had somehow acquired the notion that Mrs. Churt's piece of handiwork was a lucky charm, and many of them came seriously to touch it with one finger before retiring to bed. It's like the bit of turf in the centre of the Manchester United football pitch, said Private Tompkins. Dead lucky that is. You touch it with your finger, they say, you get all the good luck of everybody who's ever stepped on it. But Mrs. Churt was not paying attention. She sighed. That Corporal Big Toe, he was a real one for a laugh. Come to that, they was all nice boys, lively. I'd like to set up some kind of memorial to them. What kind, Mrs. Churt? Asked Dyken, sipping his hot molasses and milk. I'll have to think. Now you hop it off to bed. You got to keep busy tomorrow. The next day at dawn, Dyken, reporting to the galley for his morning toddy, was surprised not to find Mrs. Churt presiding over the big copper cooking plates that were heated by power from the engines. Instead, Orderly Widgery was back in charge, stirring the cauldrons of porridge and toasting raisin buns for the men's breakfast. Where's Mrs. Churt? Having a lie-in, I dare say, after the bean feast she cooked last night. Dyken thought this most unlike Mrs. Churt, but he had no time for more talk. The call for assembly was sounding on Catchpole's whistle. Men were tumbling out the big doors at the rear of the train and forming into squares of 10. Dyken, who had been polishing his drum since 3 a.m., tumbled himself out likewise and took his place at the side of the troop, who all looked like unicorns in their pronged snark masks. They carried long, wicked December guns, squat, wide flamethrowers, and had kelpie knives slotted all over their equipment, wherever there was room. Now then, you little smidgy-faced article, roared Sergeant Bellswinger to Dyken. You keep your eye on Captain Twilight there, and follow wherever he goes. When I say the word march, you begins to play, and you doesn't stop till you hears Catchpole sound the recall, understand? Company, troop, shun! First, arms, eyes, front, left, turn at the double, march! To the trump, rat-a-tat, tat, 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 tum, sang Dyken's drum under his rattling drumsticks as he panted along in Captain Twilight's rear beside the troop of men who were hurrying grimly and gaily up toward the top of a long, rough slope of moorland. When they reached the summit, they could see down on the other side through the morning mist the battered tower blocks of Manchester. Between the troop and the town, swarmed a wild medley of monsters, hopping, swooping, galloping on 9 legs, gliding on slimy suckers, prancing on claw-fringed hooves, floating on bat wings. Croupice, said Private Mollusk. 'Tis like the teddy bear's picnic. As good as a panto, said Private Riley. All we need's the fairy queen. Rumpa-tumpa-tumpa-tum, beat Dyken's drumsticks. Squat load, bawled Sergeant Bellswinger. On the word, fire! A sheet of flame and a black hail of missiles swept across the open space. It was a ferocious battle. Out of the mist to the south, a dim red sun presently mounted, and a cast of patches of crimson light on the frosty slope, on the grimly many-shaped monsters and the men who looked almost as wild as their griffin capes, gorgon shields, and snark masks. Daikin, too, had been issued a snark mask. It was much too big for him and kept slipping. Every few minutes he had to hitch his head back and shake it into position. He longed to take it off and sling it over his shoulder, but he did not, for 3 reasons. First, Sergeant Bellswinger had threatened to cut his stripes out if he did so. Second, he observed Ensign Crisworthy take his mask off to blow his nose, and a second later vanish like a burnt tissue as a snark winged down on him. Third, rattling away at the big drum like a mad woodpecker, Daikin simply hadn't time to do anything but keep drumming. Sometimes the fight roared and seethed all around him. Sometimes it swept away into the distance. Sometimes he had the satisfaction of seeing some beast pause, hesitate, catching the sound of his desperate tattoo, and then suddenly fall in half like a tree struck by lightning. On the whole, he received very little notion of how the general trend of battle was going. Whether the Cockatrice Corps might be winning or losing, there seemed to be an unlimited supply of monsters. They kept pouring out of the sky and from the towers of Manchester, like swarming seagulls or hungry locusts. Daikin thumped away, often ducking a whistling wing or leaping aside to dodge a raking talon. Once he was wrapped in slimy tentacles and had to slash himself loose at frantic speed with his kelpie knife, transferring both drumsticks to his left hand temporarily, but not once did he stop drumming, not even when he thought he saw Mrs. Churt hurry across the hillside among the men in their dark brown uniforms and the cream-colored salmon-pink, yellow-gray, and leopard-spotted monsters. I must have imagined I saw Mrs. Churt, Daikin thought. What on earth would she be doing in a scrimmage like this? Maybe I'm getting feverish. I've got cramps in my arms and feet, and I can't feel my hands at all. Then, all of a sudden, the battle was over, not because one side or the other had gained a definite victory, but simply because of the weather. Sharp, slashing javelins of snow hissed down out of the low gray clouds, now purpling towards sunset, the sunset of Christmas Eve. The snow cut strong and blinded men and monsters alike. In 5 minutes, hardly a living creature was to be seen on the rough hillside. Bodies lay scattered here and there, men, manticores, snarks, hydras, cockadrills, tossed higgledy-piggledy. Daikin recognized the bodies of 2 men and an officer, Captain Twilight, but he was too dead tired to feel anything but a kind of puzzled sadness. His one wish was to find his way back to the train, fall on his bunk, and sleep for 100 hours. Had the recall been sounded? And which was the way back? During the battle, he had been pushed further and further along the slope. Now he found himself at the foot of a shallow gully, but it was hard to see more than a few yards through the slicing, stinging snow. It must be right if I keep going downhill, he thought, and ran, stumbling and slipping as fast as he could over the tussocky ground, his drum banging awkwardly on his hip. A layer of snow caked over his snark mask, blinding him, so he took off the mask. Snarks can't like this weather any more than I do, he decided, and if I keep on it, I shall only walk into a river, and if I keep it on, I shall only walk into a river or something. Looking everywhere for the troop train, he was dismayed to see instead a high wall ahead of him. It was so high that its top was veiled in cloud and snow. Oh, crumbs, I must have gone wrong. This must be Manchester Town Wall. I'll just have to turn around and go back. Before he could turn, he was halted by a shout. Who goes there? Man or monster? Stop or I shoot. I'm a man, called Daikin through chattering teeth. His uniform was soaked through. His boots were full of snow. He felt like an icicle. Man? You don't look like it, said the voice. Well, come forward, but slowly, for if either of us makes a mistake, you'll end up with a stomach full of red-hot sand. Daikin scrunched slowly over the snow toward a narrow gate, which he now saw in the wall ahead of him. Holy smoke, said the voice. It is a nipper. Wait till the warden of the gate hears this. Come along in, you poor little sardine. You must be half perished. 5 minutes later, Daikin found himself in a warm, bright, noisy place, the barrack room of the Manchester Town Wall Guard Squad, where he was given a cup of hot herb tea. rubbed with towels and questioned eagerly by the warden, the mayor, all the guard officers, and half the citizens of Manchester about the battle, his part in it, and the cargo of the Cockatrice Bell. We did manage to set up radio transmissions, you see, but then lost them again when the cloud of monsters swooped down so low, the mayor explained, and the visibility was so bad, and the snark glass in the town wall windows is so thick that we couldn't see what was happening. Often enough, the monsters have battles among themselves. We couldn't be sure it wasn't that. You might have sent a party out to make sure, Aiken thought, but he was too tactful to say so. We're all a bit weak here, you see, the mayor apologized. Half a cup of thin gruel each a day for the last 6 weeks. Aiken realized the Manchester men did look desperately thin and pale. He forgave them for not dashing out to help their rescuers. There's a big load of tinned carrots on the train, he said. Carrots! I'll have to try at making radio contact again now that dark has fallen. Radio contact was presently established from the mayor's electric shaver to Colonel Clipspeak's tea kettle, and Aiken learned that the men of the Salty Party had fought their way back to the train, having inflicted heavy casualties on the monsters and not suffered too badly themselves. The colonel was delighted to hear that his drummer boy was safe in Manchester and promised to send in the carrot supply at first light as a Christmas present for the population of Manchester. The boy had better stay with us. We'll pick him up in the morning. The boy had better stay with you. We'll pick him up in the morning. Dozens of people offered Aiken a bed for the night. He had never felt so popular, but he said, My Auntie Floss used to live in Manchester. If she's still alive, Mrs. Florence Monsoon and my cousin Sana, I'd like to see them if they're still here. Somebody knew where Mrs. Monsoon lived, in a high-rise block called Brill Cream Court. Aiken was taken there in the mayor's rickshaw, pulled by a dozen weak but grateful citizens. Brill Cream Court was a gaunt concrete tower at the end of a cul-de-sac. The stairs are through that door, coughed the mayor's son as he pointed with a shaking hand. You won't mind if we don't come up. Weeks of gruel don't leave your legs up to climbing stairs. Your auntie's at number 15. Aiken said of course he could find his way, thanked them all heartily, and started up the steps. After weeks on the one-story train and the long day's battle, his own legs did not feel any too strong. As he toiled slowly up the concrete flights, illuminating his way by sparring flashes of his hydrotorch, a queer feeling took hold of him. What was it? In the battle, he had no time to feel frightened. The monsters did not scare him, but now he realized that the hungry, shadowy feeling inside him was fear. He was afraid, and yet he did not know why. As he neared the door of number 15, he found himself walking more and more slowly. The door, which was shabby, dirty, and battered, had a little spy hole in it. When Aiken stood outside, his heart went pit-a-pat. He heard people talking in the flat. I can see Cousin Aiken, said a soft voice, and a louder, sharper voice said, Oh, don't be such a pest, Sana. You put me quite out of patience, that you do. Then there came the sound of a brisk slap and a low cry. Aiken tapped on the door. Immediately there was complete silence inside. Then a pale gray eye surveyed him through the spy hole. Who's that? Snapped a voice, the same that had said, You put me out of patience. Drummer Aiken, Prestwich, looking for his auntie, Mrs. Monsoon. The door opened slowly. A skinny woman stood regarding him with suspicion. Then her face cleared a little. Well, upon my word, it is Aiken. Whatever are you doing here? Come to give you Mum's best wishes, said Aiken. I was on the troop train that brought the carrots to Manchester. Oh, carrots, breathed the girl who stood behind Mrs. Monsoon. She was Aiken's size, or a little taller, red-haired, and would have been nice-looking if she were not so thin and sad. Cousin Sana, Aiken explained. Remember how you used to play my mouth organ? He would have shaken hands with her, but strangely enough, Sana's hands were tied behind her with a strap of rag. We have to do that, hastily explained his aunt, observing Aiken's look of puzzled outrage. Sana's too active for this flat. She'd have everything topsy-turvy in no time. There was not an inch of spare space in Mrs. Monsoon's tiny apartment, Aiken noticed. Hundreds of little china pots covered every surface. It was my hobby. Used to collect them, brought them back as souvenirs from holidays, said Aunt Floss, noticing Dakin's eyes on the pots. Then Sonna's mum and dad died abroad, and I had to bring her back, and then, of course, we had to stop traveling. It was plain that she blamed her niece for this. Daikin began to feel very sorry for Sonna, shut up in such a small place with all these pots, as well as Florence Monsoon, who looked to him like a short-tempered woman. The basement of Barclay's Bank, Shepherd's Bush, was a paradise in comparison. Well, Daikin, said Mrs. Monsoon sharply, confirming his impression of her. You can't stop the night here, for we've no room, as you can see. Maybe Mrs. Beadnick, who moved in across the way, could take you. I'll just step across and ask her. Don't you touch anything when I'm gone. The moment she was out the door, Daikin cut through the rag, fastening Sonna's wrist with his kelpie knife. How can she tie you up like that? He said. It's dreadful. Oh, no, it's really best, Sonna told him earnestly. Otherwise, I'm sure to knock something over. She only ties my hands during the day. But, Daikin, I don't think it's a good plan you're going to stay with Mrs. Beadnick. She's not very nice. She's rather queer. She only came to this building a few weeks ago. Maybe I'd better go back to the barracks, said Daikin doubtfully, but Sonna's eyes suddenly grew large as saucers and she gazed at Daikin in fright. Oh, Daikin, I can see a woman who knows you. She's out in the street being chased by a manticore. How do you mean you see her? She's in the street, down below. Her name's Mrs. Churt. But how can you see her? Demanded Daikin, for the windows had thick blinds over them. Oh, I can see through walls. Quick, let's go round and help. Quick, let's go and help her. As they scampered down the steep concrete stairs, Daikin panted. Will Aunt Floss be very angry when she finds you've gone out? Oh, no, I'm sure not. She's very fed up with me. She often says she wishes she'd never had to take charge of me. Look there. Sonna had pulled Daikin round a couple of street corners, running through the dark, silent town. Now they came to a bit of wasteland covered with lavender bushes. The scent was very strong, and they saw Mrs. Churt being chased by a huge manticore. She was running clumsily, weighted down by the 2 heavy baskets she carried. The beast was gaining on her at every bound. It was just about to pounce. Stop it! Stop it! Screamed Sonna. Daikin dragged out his liquid air pistol, aimed it as best he could with shaking hands, and pressed down the plunger. A fierce, narrow jet, unbelievably much colder than ice, melted the manticore into a dark blue jelly when it was only 2 leaps behind Mrs. Churt. Oh, my gracious, exclaimed the lady. I am pleased to see you, young Daikin. I thought I was a goner that time. Wish we could have made him into a blackberry tart, she added, looking critically at the dissolved monster. And who's this little beauty, eh? This is my cousin Sonna, said Daikin, thinking how much better his cousin looked when her cheeks were pink with excitement. Pleased to meet you, dearie. I can see you're a gal as'll go far. In fact, I've been dreaming about you, my love, these last 2 or 3 nights. I thought we'd be meeting soon. Now we'd best be getting back to the train. I'd have been back long ago, making sorrel soup for the lads, if that monster hadn't chased me out of my way. And Mrs. Churt indicated her basket laden with winter spinach and greenery. I've got a bit of white heather, too, to grow in a pot as a memorial for Corporal Bigtoe and those others what got killed. But how can we get back to the train, Mrs. Churt? We're inside the town wall. Yes, dear, but there's a way through here. No one seems to have noticed, probably because it's all covered by them lavender bushes. And nipping along with great confidence, as if crossing her own back garden, Mrs. Churt led them along a narrow gully back to where the Cockatrice Bell was parked. It was lit from end to end as the combatants sang and drank sassafras tea with rum in it, and played table tennis and discussed the battle, and planned next day's maneuvers. All the red and green Christmas bells were being rung by an invasion. All the red and green Christmas bells were being rung by an invention of Corporal Widgery, from heat generated by the men that had played ping-pong. Colonel Clipsbeak was pleased to see Daikin back, and even happier to welcome Mrs. Churt, who had been given up for lost. Never, ever leave the train without an escort, he scolded her. We can't spare you, Mrs. Churt. No, but you'll be glad to have all these lovely greens I got, she replied placidly. A beautiful mess of salad, and I'll be able to make for the boys now, and this young lady's going to come and be my helper, aren't you, dear? That young person? Certainly not, exclaimed the colonel. One female on this train is quite enough. Two would be entirely out of the question. Oh, now, sir, don't be hasty. Just you wait. Don't you go for to be so sticklish. This young lady's got a real talent, haven't you, dearie? Said Mrs. Chirk comfortably. She can see things as hasn't happened yet. Through walls and all, she can see 'em. It took a long time and a lot of our argument to convince the colonel that Sana would be a really useful member of the crew on board the Cockatrice Belle. That night she had to demonstrate again and again that she really could see things, hammerheads, cockatrices, and people not only through walls, but sometimes 10 minutes before they arrived, or even earlier. At last the colonel said, "Oh, very well. She may come for a trial trip. Just on the run back to London. I don't promise more than that. Should a message be sent to her family apprising them of my decision?" Accordingly, the next morning, Christmas Day, while the carrots were being delivered under guard, a note was dispatched to Auntie Floss requesting the services of Miss Sana Blow as assistant mess orderly, female, supernumerary, 2nd grade on the Cockatrice Belle. But strangely enough, Aunt Floss was not to be found among her thousands of small china souvenirs, nor by her neighbors. Was she ever to be seen again? Her new neighbor, Mrs. Beadnick, seemed to have vanished at the same time, but the disappearance of people was such a commonplace that no one thought much about it. Only several days later did Sana, stirring soup in the galley, suddenly exclaim, "Oh, my goodness!" "What is it, dearie?" inquired Mrs. Church, chopping raisins. "Don't let the soup boil over, lovey. Shift it to one side. Oh, I just remembered the baby snock I found that last evening, sheltering by the dustbins when I threw out the tea leaves. Chopped grass they were, really, but Aunt Floss used them for telling futures. The baby snock looked so miserable and floppy I thought I'd bring it in for a warm-up, so I put it in the airing cupboard. And I was going to let it out first thing on Christmas morning before Aunt Floss came across it, only I forgot. Now I do wonder—" "Well, let that be a lesson to you, dearie," said Mrs. Churt. "Your auntie don't sound no great loss from all that I heard, but there's some things as oughtn't be brought inside, and we certainly don't want no baby snarks on this train." And that is the end of Chapter 2.